Who am I but an orphan? The way I see God is distorted. In my life, who supports? Who am I? I'll break down, don't even bother, cuz I'm awake now because the Father does.
How you guys doing today? You are tuning in to the Fatherhood podcast short with your host Dale Skinner. Just I really had an interesting week. A lot of the conversations that came up this weekend when I was out with some friends was just talking about creating a culture with your children, and that really stemmed from a friend of ours was kind of just talking to us. We were all hanging out, me, a friend of mine's, his 13, 14-year-old son, and another friend of ours. We were all just hanging out at the mall, just chilling, talking, grabbing a bite to eat. One of the conversations that came up from the death of his father, who recently passed away, was just about different things that while we do what we do with our children, as far as like just creating a culture. And what I mean by that is like I was having a conversation with my son today about doing homework, because I was telling my son, when I was your age, I didn't do homework with my father. So that's what I mean by just creating a culture. Every twice a month, me and my kids we'll all get together and we'll have breakfast. And we call it the Skinner's Saturday morning feast, and we do that twice a month, every other Saturday. So that's what I mean when I say creating a culture with your children. Now back to the conversation with my friend, a friend of ours when we were at the mall this weekend. We were talking about that, creating a culture with your children, because of what we didn't have with our fathers and what we wanted to have with our fathers, and how that really impact our lives. And moving forward, we talked about how things that we do with our children, they will one day do with their children. And for anyone that knows me, you listen to me and my wife's podcast about this love, or listen to my fatherhood podcast, I'm big on legacy. I'm big on creating a culture that will, through my grandchildren and my grandchildren's grandchildren. So that's really what I mean when I say creating a culture. And I know for a lot of different backgrounds, people of different backgrounds, that's actually normal. It's normal to cut grass with dad. It's normal to cook dinner or supper with dad. It's normal to go fishing with dad. But I think here in the African American community, for us, it's not really seen so often, because a lot of us, the majority of us, come from a background where we didn't have a father. So for us who are kind of like married now, having to deal or walk through marriage, and also having children, and more so wanting to get better in our marriage so that we can be around for our children, so that there isn't, so that they don't grow up without a father because of divorce, or any other situations that may arise. So that's kind of my focus. And I know you have people that will argue, well, divorce may be inevitable, and I mean, yeah, I'm sure it may be to some, but that's not my confession. My confession is that me and my wife are gonna grow old together. We're gonna be able to see our grandchildren. That's my confession. So for me, I speak to things when I do the Fatherhood podcast. Really, the podcast came about because of just a lot of what I do with my children that I realized that I didn't have when I was growing up. So that's really kind of what led to this podcast episode today, about just building something that can be passed on, with your children, and just having a good culture within your family. When I say family, I mean your wife and children. Of course, we may have a different culture with our siblings and our cousins and aunts, uncles, and grandparents, of course. But I'm specifically speaking about my household, my home. And one of the things that oftentimes that I have to remember when I talk to my children, or when I talk to my son, and my other two kids are young, so they don't care about nothing these days except for toys and playing and food. Every time it's dinner time, they getting some food. They start doing a little by the eat dance. But my son, he's 9 years old, and over the weekend we were doing homework, And as we were doing homework together, I could see that him and I both were getting frustrated. So today we were riding to his grandparents' house, and I was talking to him about when I was your age, I didn't do homework with my father. He was like, well, why? I said, because my father really wasn't in the house a lot. He was like, well, why? Where was he at? I was like, he was in jail. He was like, he was in out of jail, which in itself opened up a can of worms. And he was like, well, what did he do? And I was like, well, what didn't he do? I was being sarcastic, but he didn't realize I was being sarcastic. I was like, I'm joking. Um, but what I just said to him was that my father was he was around in my life whenever he wasn't in and out of prison. I said, but it wasn't to the degree as that I'm in your life. I said, you see me every day. Every day when you go to sleep, you see me. Every day when you wake up, you see me. On weekends, I'm cooking breakfast. It wasn't to that degree. And one of the things that I realized when I talked to my son is that this is actually new and foreign to me. To them, it's normal. To my kids, it's normal to see dad, in the house when we have, when we wake up in the morning. It's normal to my kids that dad put us to bed every morning, every night. To them, it's normal. They don't really know any other lifestyle. But to me, as I begin to father my kids, I just think about just it has me reflect about things that I didn't have with my father growing up, and how I actually I like being a father. It's tough at times. It's difficult, especially when you have disagreements, with your wife, where you and your wife are not seeing eye to eye in different times because of whatever. You pick a day. You know what I'm saying? Pick a day, pick a reason, and stick to it. But my point is, I enjoy being a father. That's one of the things that I actually find value in, and that I see a benefit in. I realize that the things that I do with my children today will forever affect the way that they see the world. Another thing that I think about, which again, I didn't have a father to have different conversations with my buddy of mine. So we were all having at the mall, chilling in the food court, eating burritos. He was talking about a conversation that he had with his daughter, just about being woke and things like that, and the scenario that had arisen in her school where a white kid had dropped the N-bomb. And he was just saying how him and her were kind of talking through that. She's 16 years old. She's 16 years old in high school, and she was. I guess from what I gather from the conversation, what he was saying is that people were kind of upset, and and so he asked her the question. He was like, "Well, do they use the N word around him?" And she was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Well, do they call him the N word?" She was like, "Well, yeah." He was like, "So, and does he listen to hip hop music?" "Well, yeah." And he was like, "So, explain to me exactly what's the problem." And he wasn't saying that there's a problem, but what he was saying is that, like, he was, and this is a conversation that he was having with his daughter, father to daughter. He was like, the problem with that is that we say, or people say, African Americans say, don't use the N word. He said, but I call you, what up, my trigger? How you doing, my trigger? And we drop the N-bomb, but then it's like, what? But you can't use it. And he was just helping her to realize that it's just hypocrisy, all it is. And he was like, if I don't want this white kid or white girl, whatever, to use the N word, but I'm calling them the N word, um, I'm playing music around them that they saying the N word, and I'm calling other black people around them the N word. Really, what do you expect? And he was like, as he began to talk to her, she was like, you know what, you're right. I never thought about it from that perspective. And I was like, wow, that's the benefit of having a father. And I know a lot of African Americans would disagree with what he said, and that's neither here nor there. I mean, I don't really care if you agree or disagree. That's not really the point. The point is that when I was that age, 16 years old, I couldn't sit and have conversations with my father like that. So even now, I just, and every time I'm around him, his wife, and his children, I always tell his kids, I'm like, man, you guys are blessed. Like you guys have something that most kids you going to school with probably don't have. That's both parents in the household who are still, happily married, going out on dates, That's something that a lot of people, a lot of kids don't really have, a lot of children in the African American community don't really have. So it's just something I think about, how as a father, I want to create that culture with my children. Like even my son, sometimes when we go to bed at nighttime, we'll read the scriptures, and I'll ask him, "Well, what do you think this Bible verse mean? Like, what does it mean to you?" And he'll be like, "Well, I think it means A, B, C, and D." And I said, "Well, this is really what it means, And I'm like, I'm glad that you're hearing and able to kind of, just kind of give me your perspective of what you think it means. But this is what it means, and we kind of talk like that. And when it comes to just giving my kids the biblical truths, and me and my wife have a saying, and one of our saying is that I'm not gonna leave it to an institution to teach my kids about God. I'm gonna teach my kids about God. You know why? Because I didn't have that growing up as a kid. I didn't have my father telling me about God. My mother told me about God as best as she could and as best as she understood, but it wasn't really a lot of those kind of conversations. It was more so, kind of what we call Christianese, like, hey, do A, B, C, and D because God's watching, or do A, B, C, and D or you might go to hell. Don't get me wrong. I appreciated those conversations. I feel like a lot of those conversations probably kept me in my life to a place where God could get to me and bring me back to the knowledge of who He is. So today's podcast short. It's just as fathers having a intentionality about presenting a certain culture to our children and our wives, not just our children, and also to our wives, that we present a certain culture, to our families, so that because the culture just won't affect us, it'll also affect our children's children. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that on today. I would love to hear your feedback. Love to hear what you think about it. Your thoughts on it, if any. As always, you can ingest our podcast anywhere where podcasts can be found. I'm sorry, I keep saying our. Again, me and my wife have a podcast about this love, which is really where this Fatherhood podcast gets posted at. So when I say ours, I'm just used to saying our because it's usually me and her. But anything that I have is hers, and anything that she has is mine. So it's ours, our podcast, Fatherhood. Also, you can check out our podcast about this love, where me and my wife talk about marital relationships and just the different dynamics of relationship. We also talk about culture within our marriage as well. Just how what we didn't have, and how we learn to be good husbands and wives, and if we are good husbands and wives. So thank you guys for tuning in. Fatherhood Podcast Short. Your host Dale Skinner. Until next time, peace.